So using our latest example of using query parameters, we queried for Honda in a descending order and we got results back. If you remember from our exist demo code, if we pass in a invalid name, make, such as Mazda, we will receive back a null response, and not even a null JSON response, just a null string. So let's run this and see what it looks like. Okay, so we can see that the data that came back is null. Our HTTP response is still a status code 200. It does not have any errors, it does not have any faults. However, you can see above here that our deserialization has failed. And this is normal, and this is going to happen. So let's talk about a little bit about errors. The way that Web API Kit treats errors, if the request is canceled, times out, or returns a hard error, such as a 400 or a 500 series, then has error will be true. The faults, on the other hand, are abstracted away from the HTTP protocol. If we decide that this null response should fault this operation, then we can do that as well. So a fault is more of a failure of communication at a message level than at an HTTP level. If we look at the send method, it's an extension method that lives in the utilities class, and it's an extension method for HTTP operations. So here we register our callbacks on success, on failure, and on completion. On completion gets fired all the time, regardless of success or failure. Success is fired when the status code of the response is in the 200 series or 100, and the operation is not faulted. The failure callback is fired when the response status code is not in the 200 series or is not 100, or the operation is faulted. So if we go back to our operation example here, there is another attribute or a set of attributes in the extended faulters folders, and what we could do is HTTP fault null, which accepts a field name. So in this case it is the response field name, and what this is going to do after the response arrives back and the response field evaluates to null, the operation is faulted will be set to true. So there's a error at a data communication level, not at the protocol level. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we have a response of null, and let's take a look at the HTTP response. You'll see that it's still 200 status. It does not have an error, but it does have a fault. And the reason is the field response was null on response. Let's skip ahead a little bit and actually move on with our exist examples here, and let's cause a 404 error. So if you remember, if we send an invalid make name here, we're going to get a 404. So that's version 3 of our template. Okay, let's add this into our tests. Let's comment this previous one out. Let's copy out this one. Okay, let's pass in an invalid value here. Okay, you will see here now that we were in an errored state. So let's look at our response, and that's true. The status code is 404, has error is set to true, and the error text is 404 not found. Now, so let's see what happens in our version 5 of our API, where if we send an invalid value, we're going to get a return code of 200, but we're also going to receive a fault message. Okay, so we've set up our class here for version 5. Let's add it into our tests here. And we're going to send an invalid value of Mazda. So we've successfully completed the operation, and if we look at the response, we get a 200 OK. It does not have any errors and it does not have any faults. But if you'll see, our deserializer has failed because it cannot map a fault message into a car's model type. So we want to know about this. We want to know about this fault, and we would do this. We would add in another model. Okay, this looks pretty much like the JSON response we received, and what we're going to do now is create another public message fault and attribute it with HTTP response JSON body. So on a response, we know that we can either expect a car model's response or a message fault response. And here we're going to use one of our falters, again an extended falters folder, and we're going to use HTTP fault non-null on the fault field. So what's going to happen is when the response comes back, if it sees that the fault field is not null, then a fault will be thrown and the operation will be set to faulted. So we have the fault, and is faulted is set to true. Fault contract field fault was not null on response. So let's see if we do pass in Honda what we get. And we get the real data back, no faults, no errors. In this video we've talked about errors and fault contracts.